Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. As you are hopping into the session with your Zoomsicles, if you wouldn't mind just taking a sec and throwing in the chat your role and maybe where you're physically located, it will help us have a better sense of kind of who's joining us today and where you're all sitting. Right, so I see that the chat's starting to come in, and we'll give folks one more minute to transition from the other fantastic last session. I hope you all had a chance to catch the students. That's always a highlight of these meetings. And I am not seeing anyone else in the wait room, so I think we're going to go ahead and jump in. So again, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are sitting. I am Rebecca Wolfe. I lead our impact and improvement work at KnowledgeWorks, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. And I am joined today, if the slide lets me advance, there we go. I'm being joined today by Mark Duffy, who is a senior research associate at Research for Action and was the lead on the study that we'll be integrating into our conversation today, as well as Dr. Gregory Seaton, who is senior director on our impact and improvement team. And together we help oversee our team's efforts to document the impact KnowledgeWorks is having in our partner states and districts. And we also provide CQI, continuous quality improvement supports to our partners. And we share research emerging from our work that helps build the field of equity-focused, personalized, competency-based learning. And you will be hearing more, obviously, from each of them as we go through our conversation. So what can you expect this morning? For our little bit of time together, I'll spend a few more minutes just providing an overview to help ground us in the context of what is it KnowledgeWorks is doing in some states. And then we'll turn to Mark, who will talk about the Research for Action study on creating state-level conditions to support the work, what they've been calling a roadmap to scaling at a state level. Personalized competency-based learning. And then we're going to reserve the biggest chunk of the time because as you hopefully saw in the program book, this is a problem of practice session. So the largest chunk of time, you will get to choose which of the problems of practice breakout groups you are most interested in digging in with us and your fellow attendees. So the two choices, just if you want to start sort of thinking through which ones you want to be going into, the first will be around using the roadmap that Mark is going to discuss and thinking about ways to apply it and support work in your own context or state. And the second group is going to look at challenges of doing this work in the current climate, in particular challenges of the highly politicized nature of many of our states as we try to tackle work that is equity focused and personalized. And then we'll come back together and Greg will lead us in a conversation around what do we learn from each other, what sorts of ways of addressing those challenges are we starting to surface, and then we'll leave a little bit of room at the end to make sure you have time to do the Aurora Institute survey. We are going to be using Padlet for those breakout groups. So if you happen to already have a Padlet account, it would be great if you want to log in now or while we're talking, because that way, as you start commenting, it'll be more personalized and we'll have more of a sense of who you are and what the comments are. And that will be a great part of trying to get the conversation going in the breakouts. So a little bit about KnowledgeWorks' approach in the States. So KnowledgeWorks, as an organization, tries to actualize this big statement. So through evidence-based practices and a commitment to equitable outcomes, we are creating the future of learning together. And thanks in part to the forecasts of our strategic foresight team, our current best bet of how we get to this vision, how we are able to do this kind of work, is through what we call personalized competency-based learning. So what is that? Hopefully by now, 3 days of Aurora sessions, you have a pretty good sense of certainly the competency-based piece. So for KnowledgeWorks, we have adopted the Aurora Institute definition of competency-based learning. We've modified it ever so slightly. And again, this is the most recent version for those of you who heard Susan Patrick's overview. It's gone through several iterations, and we have taken on the most recent version. And we've adapted it ever so slightly. So the 7 areas of competency-based learning, these are what we would expect to see in the classrooms or from a student level perspective, if fully personalized competency-based learning is present in their school. However, KnowledgeWorks is ultimately a systems level intermediary. So what that means is that our work is primarily with state level leaders, organizations, districts, district teams, and teams of educators that are trying to create the transformation so that students can experience that PCBL approach that you saw in the previous slide. So in order to think about our work, not just in terms of what would happen in the classroom, onto our definition, we layer on another whole level that we call our systems level commitments. So at KnowledgeWorks, when we work with our partners, we are committed to building in systematic structures and supports to ensure equity in outcomes, to build a shared vision and culture, and to build agency and shared accountability. And these go through all levels of the system. And agency, well, absolutely pivotal to our work at the student level. When we are working with our partners, it is also thinking about educator agency, as they are the professionals in the day-to-day who most have control over whether we are able to get to those personalized competency-based learning classrooms. So what does this all look like? Or what do we do in order to try to get there? So when KnowledgeWorks partners with states and districts, we provide vision setting and articulation of a portrait of a graduate at a state level. We offer policy development and implementation supports of those policies. We develop state level learning communities. And those are bolstered by, as you see a little lower down, the district level design teams that lead the work locally. So it's a nested sort of systems of support. At both the district and state level, we conduct opportunity analyses. So these are asset-based ways of understanding what's already in place in communities at the district, school, and state level to help actualize the personalized competency-based learning work. And so those opportunity analyses then help build action plans to move in the direction of more sustainable change. We have regular consultation between KnowledgeWorks and our state points of contact. And then we also have, jumping down, the ongoing and customized technical assistant for those district level teams. And finally, we wrap all of this in data collection and analysis support. So as you heard me mention, what our team looks at is both impact assessment. So are we moving the conditions? Are we ultimately having, seeing both the outputs and the outcomes for the students that we care the most about in our systems? And are we also able to produce data that helps with continuous improvement? So more real-time cycles of understanding what is moving and what isn't, so that we can achieve the change we want to see at a systems level. So KnowledgeWorks have been at this for about just over 5 years at different levels of implementation, depth and spread. And we started realizing that we had entered our states in such different ways that it was hard to get a real picture of what was working, is there a model? If there is a model, are certain approaches more effective than others? So that is where we called in Research for Action and Mark's team, because we wanted to try to understand, is there a typology? Are there choice points, decision points that as we move to other states, we want to be helping states and other leaders think about as they try to take this work to scale? So at the time, we were working with 3 states and about to bring on a 4th, and each effort was on a very different timeline and had very different levels of implementation. And each state, as you see, the ultimate states in this study, Arizona, Nevada, North Dakota, and South Carolina, you probably can guess, have pretty different political policy and population contexts of what was going on in each of those states. And because of how KnowledgeWorks approaches our partnerships, each implementation path was customized to what that state thought they wanted, where they were beginning. We say it's a personalized approach to implementing personalized learning. So no easy task for a researcher. Those of you, if there are some researchers in the room, know research is often about trying to standardize so that we can compare. We handed Research for Action quite a conundrum, because very little was standardized in this work, other than the fact we had the same TA provider, essentially KnowledgeWorks was working in all the states, and KnowledgeWorks was guided by the same overarching frameworks and principles. So these 2 guiding documents, I'm going to drop in the chat as I turn it over to Mark to tell you a little bit about what did they find when they started heading into those states.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca, for those opening remarks and just an explanation of the project and the role of KnowledgeWorks in this important work. So as Rebecca was saying, I'll be discussing our development of a roadmap of various approaches to creating state-level conditions that support personalized competency-based learning across the 4 study states. In terms of an overview of the study and a little bit more about Research for Action, Research for Action is a nonprofit education research organization based in Philadelphia, and we've been around for over 30 years, and we focus entirely on education policy and practice, research and evaluation from pre-K all the way through post-secondary. We partnered with KnowledgeWorks to really document and analyze how personalized competency-based learning is taking hold in the 4 study states and with the initial cohort of school districts that were implementing the work at that time. And the research team and KnowledgeWorks established 3 goals for the study at the outset. The first being to document the approaches and lessons learned from policy adoption and implementation of personalized competency-based learning policies in the 4 states. The second, to identify how COVID-19 impacted the move toward personalized competency-based learning in each state. And then the third goal, to identify how each state defines and operationalizes its equity commitment within the state's personalized competency-based learning efforts. The study was informed by an array of qualitative sources. It was primarily a qualitative study from the study states and districts. Specifically, the research team conducted interviews with state-level policymakers and practitioners and conducted a review of documents in spring 2021 to develop individual logic models for the personalized competency-based learning work taking place in Arizona, North Dakota, and South Carolina. And then Nevada came in a little bit later, and we worked with them in fall 21 and winter 2022 to develop the logic model for that state. The study also identified a sample of 2 districts in each of the 3 study states that were implementing personalized competency-based learning at the district level. So those were Arizona, North Dakota, and South Carolina. And the findings from the analysis of that district implementation is included in the full report, but won't be the focus of our discussion in this workshop. But if you want to see the full report, I dropped it as a link. I think it's the very first link in the chat. So feel free to look at that. And the research really was aiming to directly support and inform states and districts already utilizing personalized competency-based learning, as well as others considering the effort. So I was excited to see, as people were coming in, that it looks like there are some folks from some new states in the group today, so that's great. Can we go to the next slide? Great. Okay. So really, this systemic adoption of personalized competency-based learning at the local level requires support at the state level to remove barriers and assist with implementation locally. And so in developing this roadmap, we're really realizing that state policymakers and education advocates need to leverage their individual state contexts and opportunities for policy change by looking at the catalysts for reform, their overall state vision for education, to gather support for the adoption of personalized competency-based learning. Further, to really support implementation across a cohort of districts, states need to determine, what are the leadership models that they're going to use for the effort at the state level to support this work. What partnerships are necessary to support the effort on an ongoing basis. What's the order of local implementation? And what are the scale-up strategies going to be in order to move this from maybe a small cohort of districts to a larger set of districts, potentially statewide? So Research for Action partnered with KnowledgeWorks to develop this roadmap of various approaches to create state-level conditions that support personalized competency-based learning in the 4 study states. The roadmap examines central components of state efforts and describes how personalized competency-based learning has been fostered by the 4 states included in the study. But the roadmap certainly does not represent all of the possible options available to states to make these decisions along the way. And so that'll be the opportunity in the breakout group to really talk about the context in your own local state and to see what decision points you have and what the options might be. But in this presentation, I'll actually be focusing on 3 of the components or decision points on the roadmap, thinking of them, as Rebecca was saying, in terms of problems of practice and decision points to be considered. So we'll be looking at catalysts, state leadership models, and partnerships to support the work. So we go to the next slide. Great. Okay. So the first problem or decision point is how can state leaders create policy conditions to advance personalized competency-based learning? And so in the next few slides, we'll kind of be talking about what the study states were doing and what some examples could be gleaned from the work that was happening there. Again, the decision points will vary in each of your state contexts. But each of the study states identified at least one catalyst or impetus as an important driver in the advancement of personalized competency-based learning in their local context. So these catalysts help to encourage or accelerate the adoption of personalized competency-based learning and build support among stakeholders for the work. Policymakers and advocates help to consider how to identify and leverage catalysts to gather support for personalized competency-based learning adoption. And so the first catalyst, not too surprisingly, that we identified was the adoption of state legislation and regulation. And this was found in all 4 of the study states. So in 2010, for instance, long before the partnership with KnowledgeWorks, a piece of legislation called Move On When Ready was passed by providing an opportunity for students to earn their high school diploma based on demonstrated mastery of college and career readiness instead of accumulating seat time and high school credits. Changing instructional needs in the wake of COVID-19 also really highlighted the value of personalized competency-based learning in meeting the needs of students where they were. And even as we start to come out of the pandemic, education policymakers are really recognizing that the world has changed in lots of ways, including how education is provided, and that states and local districts need to adapt to that. And so that was, especially in Nevada, something that state policymakers pointed to as a catalyst for their personalized competency-based learning effort. So Nevada actually started their work with KnowledgeWorks in the midst of the pandemic, and the lessons learned from instructional needs identified through the pandemic became catalysts for this work. Policy around high school graduation pathways also became a catalyst to personalized competency-based learning by opening new avenues to earn a high school diploma and allow for more flexibility in meeting state graduation expectations. So thinking about, what is the context in your state and what are what's the vision for education that can be a catalyst for supporting this work. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. And then so the second problem is, how can state leaders create the structures to support adoption and scaling? It's critical to determine, who will lead the work at the state level. Even though, of course, most implementation is happening locally, each of the states that we looked at developed state leadership models for the effort, ranging from a broad coalition of policymakers to a single nonprofit. So if we're starting from the left, thinking about that single nonprofit model, Arizona provides that example. The Arizona Personalized Learning Network, or PLN, is led by the Center for the Future of Arizona, and is a state-based nonprofit organization that really was the lead in this work and works to attract districts, secure funding, measure success, influence policy change. And their position outside of state government actually provided autonomy and opportunities to sustain the work, even when there are partnership changes in state government. So the leadership model doesn't necessarily have to be within the state government context. In both North Dakota and Nevada, the State Department of Education serves as the lead agency and coordinates with multiple offices within their Department of Education to work toward supporting the effort. So really important that when you're having those multiple offices working in a single State Department of Education, you want to have collaboration and constant communication between them. Gathering input from a broad coalition of stakeholders at the state level can also help to build support for the work and scale and sustain it in the long term. And so an example of this comes from North Dakota, where even though the Department of Public Instruction became the primary lead in this effort, in the initial stages of the work, when they were first thinking about what this is going to look like, there was a really broad coalition of stakeholders from different portions of the state who were at the table talking about this together. And then in South Carolina, kind of on the flip side, they created a designated office within the State Department of Education that focuses on personalized learning, that they call the Office of Personalized Learning. And they support statewide personalized competency-based learning adoption by providing coaching, professional development, creating communities of practice, and targeted supports to school design teams involved in the work. So but it's also important to mention that while primary responsibility for this rests with the Office of Personalized Learning, the State Superintendent of Education in South Carolina is also a very strong supporter of the work. And as I was saying, the Office of Personalized Learning collaborates across offices within the department to support these efforts. So those are a few of the state leadership models that may or may not fit in your state context. And I think next slide. Okay. And then the third problem is, how can state leaders leverage existing resources to provide critical training and ongoing support? As I'm sure many of you know, personalized competency-based learning it's hard. It's a heavy lift that requires ongoing professional development and technical assistance, not simply a one and done training. And so state capacity may not always provide all the supports that are needed. So additional capacity needs to be found to support local districts and schools in the work. KnowledgeWorks was really actually central in facilitating the development of different types of partnerships to provide these supports, including resources from inside and outside of states, locally, regionally, and state and even national partners. So the districts involved in the KnowledgeWorks effort can act as partners in the work when structured networks of cohorts are developed. So Arizona provides the example of this. The Personalized Learning Network primarily consists of 3 districts involved in an initial cohort of personalized competency-based learning. And then in South Carolina, 3 lighthouse districts are working to build district level policies to support personalized competency-based learning. So you can really use that initial group of districts to partner together and share their learning. In North Dakota, the Northeast Education Services Cooperative, which is a regional education association, provided an education fellow to provide personalized competency-based learning implementation support. So those regional education service centers that many states have can be an important resource. Along with KnowledgeWorks, states worked with organizations to provide technical assistance for specific areas of the work, often from outside of the state. Examples include the Center for Collaborative Education and Battelle for Kids, who are coming in and providing specific technical assistance around different areas of implementation. And then, of course, you can also look within your own state for partnerships that might support the work. So, for example, the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University and A for Arizona were both collaborative partners from within the state. The Teachers College focuses on college's personalized learning initiative for educators called the Next Education Workforce. And A for Arizona has worked alongside the CFA to propose legislation that better supports personalized competency-based learning. So you can bring in national partners, work with state partners, also use and really leverage the districts already involved in the work. So a number of different ways to create partnerships to support the work long term. So let me pause there and hand it back to Rebecca and Greg to talk about breakout groups.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So a lot to take in, and there's actually a whole lot more in the report. So I would really encourage you to check out the report. There's also some terrific executive summaries based on whether you're more interested in state level findings or district level findings. So again, for the sake of an hour-long session with a problem of practice, we chose to focus on just 3 of the 7 different parts of the roadmap that Research for Action established. So as promised, you are going to get your choice of breakout. So in just a moment, Mary from Research for Action is going to open 3 different rooms, but there's just 2 topics. So we have one sort of overflow room. So we're going to try to keep breakouts around no more than sort of 10 to 12 folks to ensure that there's a good chance for participation. So the first problem of practice, as I mentioned in the beginning, is applying those 3 areas that Mark just described. So looking back at the different sort of problems or challenges of different catalysts, different kinds of state leaders, and different types of partnerships in your state, how might you start to think about developing momentum for implementation of personalized competency-based learning at scale? So breakout 1, really focusing on the starting to apply those 3 aspects of the state roadmap. Breakout 2 is going to focus on those challenges. So what may be going on in your state that could be getting in the way of taking the work to scale? What do you anticipate as it starts going to scale could become a challenge? And how do we start thinking about getting in front of those challenges? And also, how might we start to think about turning those into opportunities? So similarly, we're going to apply the framework of catalysts, state leaders, and partnership, but these breakouts will focus more on the current climate in your state and thinking about the challenges for them. So I am going to stop sharing for a moment. Mary is going to pull up that breakout room, and you can self-select in there, and we will see you all back in about 20 minutes.
Back, everyone, and to my group, thank you. We did get warning that we're being pulled, but it seems like there's never enough time when you're engaged in these deep conversations. I wanted to spend some time just surfacing some of the learning from the breakout groups, and to do that, wanted us to do, I think most of you are familiar with the 3-2-1 exercise, but really wanted to spend the next couple of minutes doing a 2-1-1 exercise. 2-1-1 is sort of the local number for information in some locations, and also similar to 4-1-1. But for this, if you could put in the chat, what were 2 interesting things that surfaced during your small group conversation? 2 interesting things that surfaced. And we'll, based on the chat conversation, we'll dig a little deeper. And looking for my chat controls here. Thank you. There we go. The card catalog of data to support PCBL. Rachel, do you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
Sure. We were talking about data and the need for that, to share that with our board, to share that with stakeholders, to share that with, that's a question that we'll have a lot about, show us the data. And so it was actually shared with us in our breakout. Rebecca shared it with us, and she actually would know more about that.
Happy to put the link back in. Oops, I just opened the link instead of, yeah. So this is a resource that we started developing about a year and a half ago to try to make it easier for folks who need data on the impact of personalized competency-based learning to make the case, to make it easy to find. So out of the conversation where we were talking about how, one way to address legislators in particular concerns or get their interest in taking personalized competency-based learning to scale is to show them, the numbers. Whether or not those are the best ways to represent the work is a whole other conversation, but I will drop that link back in. And we're always looking for new studies, field research, and other things to help keep it fresh.
Thank you, Rebecca. And data are important. And just got the message to step it up a little bit in terms of making sure that we have time for the survey. Rhett, could you quickly jump on and share a little more about leading examples that drive change?
Yeah, just that conversation we had about making change in our state, and just having some examples out there and some data out there, and some to be able to communicate what this is and how it is, and how to what it takes to support it, and how it's effective. Definitely a useful thing to drive change.
I appreciate that, Rhett. And one of the things in our small breakout group was that we started identifying some of the challenges. And the question also asked for opportunities. And as we got rolling on the challenges, it's like, whoa, where are the opportunities? So I would love to ask the group in the chat, what is one bright spot as you think about scaling personalized competency-based learning in your local context? And Rachel, as the youth that I work with say, true that. True that. And Rachel is just saying, just keep in mind that teachers are doing the best that they can given their circumstances. And I definitely want to elevate that. Bright spot is to elevate community voices. Sure. Does anyone that shared one bright spot want to come off and say a little bit more about that bright spot? Don't all jump in at once. Paul, could you jump in for me, please? Really, your point really resonates with some of the conversation that we were having. In that, in many instances, seeing is believing.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've learned is that this is work that needs to start from the bottom up and from the top down together. And regardless of all the policies and systems and learning opportunities that are out there, having educators in the classroom next to you who actually have really mastered the moves of personalized competency-based learning and can influence how a school is moving in that direction can be a very powerful scaling process. And if you develop cadres of folks doing that, I've seen this in large cities as well as small communities. Once those cadres are formed and they learn to work with one another in communities of practice and professional learning communities, it really starts scaling the work regardless of the policy environment.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. And then a last one, if you could put this one in chat, is one potential next action step. We've cited some of the challenges, some of the opportunities. What might you do next? There's a data point that's trying to tell me something. Okay. Let's thank you for answering the call. And so the comments basically hinge upon greater evidence, but also greater opportunities to spread and see it. Well, on behalf of my colleagues at RFA and KnowledgeWorks, we'd like to thank you for joining us, and we will turn it over to the Aurora rep for the survey portion. Thank you all.
And Greg, if you're controlling the slides, if you want to, excuse me, flip to the last slide is our contact information. We would love to continue some of these conversations. So many great ideas. We'll be saving the chat. And this is work that we hope to see continue to keep grow and deepen and blossom and sustain. And thank you all for being part of it. Enjoy the rest of your time in Aurora, and may we all see each other in person next year.
Thank you.